Welcome to this edition of the News Review. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations has called on all signatories to the 2015 nuclear deal to uphold their end of the bargain. In an interview, Majid Takhtravanchi pointed to U.S. obligations under the International Accord and UN Resolution which endorsed the agreement. He said not only the U.S. but the European parties must also respect their commitments under the deal known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the JCPOA. The Iranian diplomat said the administration of U.S. President Joe Biden must lift all sanctions mentioned in Resolution 2231, adding that Tehran will not accept Washington if it does not meet its obligations and does so only halfway.
Over the past few years, the U.S. has changed the name of some of the sanctions that were lifted under the JCPOA. For example, it has renamed the sanctions imposed on Iran's central bank. It's up to the Americans to solve their problems. It's unacceptable for us to hear them say, we will comply with the JCPOA, but we won't lift these sanctions because they have been recategorized.
Takhtravanchi further said that Iran will go back to full compliance with its obligations under the deal once all parties do the same. The U.S. withdrew from the JCPOA in 2018 and reimposed unilateral sanctions on Iran. Tehran, in return, announced a gradual scale back of its commitments, citing the remaining signatories' failure to meet their obligations. Now, to discuss that further from Sydney, live by Mr. Tim Anderson, Director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies, and also Jason Unruhe, political commentator who's joining us out of Ontario. Let's begin with Mr. Tim Anderson. Now, Mr. Anderson, do you see any preconditions the U.S. should be seeking if it would be to join the JCPOA once again?
Thank you. Yes, I think there's going to be a big struggle within the Biden administration or behind the Biden administration, because the point of this, of course, is not really about the nuclear industry. It's a pretext to try and contain the influence, the leverage. And in the last decade, with the wars that the US has conducted, necessarily the coalition of groups has come together and Iran's role has become more important. So I think the political argument really within the US after the 20th of January will be, how are we going to get some more leverage in this situation? That will make it very difficult for Biden, even though he was in the administration that agreed to the JCPOA in the first place, to go back without trying to impose some sort of extra demands. And of course, Iran has no incentive really to comply with any additional demands. So Iran is in a strong diplomatic position, but I think there's a great risk that the Biden administration won't be able to find a way to go back to original agreement.
Unruhe, what about you? What do you think would happen? First of all, do you believe that Joe Biden would try to join the JCPOA once again, rolling back everything Trump did, which himself was actually trying to roll back everything Obama did?
I certainly think that there's a good deal of a chance that Biden will return to the original JCPOA agreement. I mean, aside from the fact that it was an agreement that was running, that was functioning properly before the Trump administration fraudulently claimed that Iran was violating it, the Biden administration, in his time with Obama, did spend a significant amount of time and energy creating that agreement. So I think that they're probably an entire whole new agreement when one already exists to begin with that both sides more or less still agree to. So I don't see as it being worth to create another one. And I think that Biden's foreign policy will be much more in line with Obama's foreign policy. So there will probably be a return to that. I wouldn't be too surprised if there were some changes to it, but I think that the essential meat and potatoes of what the agreement is will definitely come back. I mean, this is about undermining Iran's capabilities of exerting any kind of self-defense or influence throughout the region. And this was very much put forward with the new ballistic missiles that were used on dummy targets, which an 1,800-kilometer range. So with that new demonstration of power, I would certainly think that the Biden administration will probably come up with some kind of pretext to attack Iran on those grounds, or probably make some kind of demand to undermine that capability.
Now back to Mr. Tim Anderson. Mr. Unruhe believes that the Biden administration will try to rejoin the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. But do you believe that the Israeli lobby would allow this to happen? We do understand that the Trump administration did so under the influence of Israelis.
Yes, I think Biden will make some initiatives, because remember, not all of the coercive measures that the US has imposed are linked to the JCPOA. They're beyond that. And in the US, the discussion in the last 5 years has been trying to extend it, particularly into missile technology. Now, at the moment, it's not included at all. And of course, that is now the immediate threat that perhaps Israel and also some of the other US allies in the Gulf and the US shipping itself fears from Iran, the missile capability. There's no incentive for Iran to extend the JCPOA into missile technology. So, but I think there will be some pretense of shifting. That is to say, I think the Biden administration will shift and drop some of those, what did Trump call it, the maximum pressure sanctions, to try and show some sort of goodwill there. But it will be difficult for the Biden administration, I believe, because of the Republican opposition, but because of a number within the Democrats also, who are now buying into this argument that they will lose their leverage if they simply go back and adopt the 2015 agreement as is, because it had sunset clauses which have expired or going to expire. It doesn't include the missile controls that they wanted, and some of the Europeans have bought into that too. So there's going to be a very big debate in the US about this, and while they may drop some sanctions, I think there's going to be a lot of internal wrangling about simply going back and adopting the agreement as it was 5 years ago or 6 years ago.
Thank you very much, Mr. Unruhe. The final question is for you. And considering the rift that we see in the U.S. Society, there's a big gap between the two sides. That Joe Biden would actually risk going back to the 2015 nuclear deal without any preconditions, considering the situation he is facing domestically?
I don't think so. I don't think that he's willing to risk it at this time. As we do recall, the Trump administration on its way out the door decided to accuse Iran of being affiliated with Al-Qaeda, which is essentially a nonsense claim. So I can see what they're setting up here, so that when Biden comes in and tries to return to the JCPOA, the Republican Party can then turn around and claim that Biden is being soft on Al-Qaeda because they're not allegedly being hard enough on Iran. So I think that there's a dimension there that will incentivize the Democratic Party to be harder on Iran than they would prefer to be. But I think in the end, it's still, with that accusation, whether it's there or not, it's still going to serve imperialist interests.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tim Anderson, Director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies out of Sydney, and Mr. Jason Unruhe, political commentator out of Ontario. Thanks to both of you gentlemen for your points, and thanks to all of our viewers for following this edition of the News Review.